Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, A Thorn in My Side. The man who rules the world takes on an agent from the CIA from the Black Boule in this action-packed all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes' A Thorn in My Side at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. One of my viewers wanted to know what was the agenda of killing disco music. Now, disco music was a form of music that was extremely popular in the era of the late 1960s all the way up until about the early 1980s. And disco music was seen as a way for people to escape as related to the trends of rock music in the 1960s, which was mainly focused on basically being a part of the counterculture of hippies and others who basically wanted to create a counterculture to make a commentary about the racism and other issues as related to the state of America. And people basically got into disco music because disco music allowed them to basically have an escape during the time of the late 1960s and 1970s. And as time went on, a lot of people enjoyed this disco music, and they also enjoyed the fashions of disco music, which were very elaborate and fancy and allowed people to go out here and dance without a partner. Now, disco music, basically, as it grew in popularity over the course of the 1970s, again, allowed people to have that escape from all of the troubles of the 1970s, because the 1970s were a very tumultuous period in contrast to the 1960s, where America had a lot of economic prosperity. Now, America had a lot of economic prosperity in the 1960s, and that allowed counterculture music to become popular. However, as we came out of the 1960s into the 1970s, this was a very dark period in American history where America's economy went into a state of decline with inflation, with recessions, with a series of recessions going on, and a lot of political and social upheaval as related to political corruption, and a lot of people having to deal with all of this political turmoil. This caused a lot of stress for people, and the way people got their stresses out was by going out here and going to the discotheques. Now, these discotheques were basically clubs where people could go out here and listen to records, because that's what a discotheque is. It's basically a place where records could be played, and DJs would basically go out here, and this was the place where people started to mix music. And as they mixed music as related to the discotheques, they would go out here and start making original disco music. And again, disco clubs were very popular here in America as the 1970s went on, and disco became again a global thing where not only did we have original musicians, but we had Motown coming in. Now, Motown was known for most of the black music that was made as related to music, and everybody was basically making all of this disco music and making this disco music as from 1974 to 1977, where disco became mainstream. And as disco became mainstream, it basically took over many of the top 40. And as it took over the top 40 with songs like the Hughes Corporation's Rock the Boat, Kung Fu Fighting, and many other songs like Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive, and many other songs, we saw disco start to rise in popularity. And as it rose in popularity, we saw bands like the Casey and the Sunshine Band go out here and rise in popularity. And Motown again became a part of disco. And as disco started to grow, we started to see Europeans coming in with bands like ABBA and many other bands coming out with their music. And disco basically started to become, as it started to become mainstream, this is where it became a part of culture, with not only the ABBA with the Dancing Queen, but with the iconic film Saturday Night Fever, which made John Travolta into a superstar and basically showed the struggles of people in the 1970s. The film Saturday Night Fever is an icon of the disco era and records life at the time of the disco era, and again, all of the struggles people had at the time of the disco era. And people basically, again, as disco was going mainstream after the success of Saturday Night Fever and the success of the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack that was created by the Bee Gees, which became the definitive band of that movie and the disco, one of the disco era, because that album was a masterpiece. Then we had Donna Summer coming out, and again, disco had a lot of popularity. And the thing is, what happened with disco was you had a lot of rock musicians who had an issue with the disco music, and these rock musicians basically had an issue with disco music, and because they started to have this issue with disco music, this is what created a whole anti-disco message. An anti-disco message because a lot of rock musicians and rock music fans, especially those in the United States, really didn't like the fact that disco music was popular, and they basically were out here ironically creating their own counterculture by saying that disco music was consumerist and overproduced and escapist. But the whole thing is that the music was an escape due to the turmoil people were going through in the 1970s. And they really didn't want to again go out here and deal with these problems. They just wanted to go to a dance club, a disco club, to get away from problems for a minute. That's what people did in the 1970s. They wanted to have that escape. They wanted to have that escape and get a break from either long-term unemployment or underemployment, or basically the stresses of trying to make ends meet. That's what people were trying to do in the 1970s. Again, it was a really rough time. I mean, I was born in that era, but I saw the tail end of that era with a lot of people. And as I studied a lot of films, I saw how rough the 1970s were. And people were, again, a lot of the rock musicians were angry because they couldn't go out here and make their kind of music, so they went out here and went to make a protest against disco music. And as they made their protest against disco music, what was happening was we were starting to see some trends start to emerge as related to music. This is where punk started to come out, and punk was the foundation for the goth subculture. And punk in the late 70s and the early 80s was again very much about rebellion. It was very much about pushing back against what they thought was the mainstream, such as disco. And again, as things were building up as related to this anti-disco sentiment, this is what was happening with the media. People were speaking against disco music, and eventually what happened in 1979 was we had the Disco Demolition Night. Now, the Disco Demolition Night was something that took place at Comiskey Park in Chicago, and this led to a riot on the field of this game. Now, this Disco Demolition Night is known as what was considered to be the iconic event that basically led to the decline in disco because of its roots as related to black music, Latin music, and alphabet culture. And a lot of people, again, were angry about disco as related to it being technical and mechanical, and frustrated because they wanted to go out here, and they were also upset that they saw a lot of black faces rising up as the face of disco and a lot of roots in alphabet culture. And this is where people basically got angry at the whole idea of disco music, and got so angry about disco music that basically you had this event that took place in Chicago with the owner basically looking to again generate some interest for his stadium, for his games, and he thought that this would be a nice little publicity stunt as related to things. Unfortunately, what happened was this whole event of Disco Demolition Night basically led to a riot taking place, and this riot that took place as related to things became completely out of control, and became completely out of control as related to this event at this doubleheader baseball game, and became completely out of control, and basically led to people again participating in this riot on the field. And as they participated in this riot on the field, They just created a lot of chaos, and this chaos, which basically happened at this game, some people say that it basically led to the end of disco music here in America. And overall, basically said this whole destruction of all these disco records at this event, it led to the decline of things. But what happened is disco still went on in the 80s, and record companies were still making disco music. But what was happening actually with things as related to disco music was there was no agenda to go out here and kill disco. No, things were changing as related to what people listened to. People were coming out of disco and starting to become a bit more conservative. And as people were becoming a bit more conservative, they were looking to listen to different kinds of music. And we started to see, again, a complete change as related to music. We started to see people going out here and thinking about listening to other kinds of music, listening to other kinds of music, like with the rise of the punk music movement, and that punk music movement leading into the goth subculture. And we started to see the pop music start to change overall, and we started to see Western music start to become popular. Moreover, we started to see, again, the entire foundation of rap and hip hop, again, as it started to evolve in this period, because we started to see everything start to evolve. And disco music, while it went out of popularity in the late 80s, not early late 80s, but the early 80s, it went out of popularity in the early 80s. However, its music basically still went on, and it still went on in the form of other types of synthesized music, which was a major part of 1980s music. And in the later eras of the 1980s, we basically saw disco's influence as related to house music and techno music. So disco, basically, there was no conspiracy to go out here and kill disco. No, what happens with things is that as times change and trends change, people change what they're looking at and listen to. And again, as the world changes, people felt like it was time to stop escaping the world with disco as the economy got better under Ronald Reagan. And as the economy got better under Ronald Reagan, people felt safe about exploring other forms of music and decided to return to reality instead of looking to escape to a club. So things just basically changed as related to time, and as things changed as related to time, people just found a different kind of music to get into. And there was no conspiracy to kill disco, just people, basically, some people just got tired of listening to the same music all the time, and some people just got tired of the repetitive beats as related to disco. No different than when I get tired of gangster rap music and trap house music, which just talks about drug dealing and crime all the time. No, people go out here, and as they change from generation to generation, they want a completely different sound. And as they want a completely different sound, they want to again make their own music and make their own commentary about the world. And this is what happened as related to disco. People in the 70s were using music to make their own commentary on the world. And as those people basically moved on into their adult lives, they decided to again move on to another form of music. And again, that's basically what happens with music all the time. People basically move on from one form of music to the next. I mean, when it comes to the 1930s and the 1940s, crooners were all the rage. Then came rock music, and then rock music transitioned into disco, and disco then gave way to punk music, gave way to goth music, gave way to rap music, gave way to pop icons like Madonna, Michael Jackson, George Michael, Whitney Houston, and that gave way in the black community to not only rap music but new jack swing and R&B, and that led to gangster rap. And again, people just go from music form to music form, and that's just part of life. There's no killing a genre. People still possibly can make disco records if they want to, but people now are making other kinds of music inspired by disco, like house and techno and EBM. So music is just something that goes on, and it goes on, and again, there's no killing a genre. Again, people just move on from it, and that's basically what happened to disco as a music form. Now, this was a video requested by one of my viewers, and if you want to request a video, you can drop a donation for a minimum of $15 to the PayPal or the Cash App by clicking the link in the description box. And if I know something about that subject, and that subject isn't an asinine one like IG models, or something stupid like characters fighting each other, I will make that video for you if I know something about the subject. And if you want to pick up some of my books on the SJS Direct Imprint, you can find those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft to Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you request a video, you have to give me time to make those videos. Sometimes videos need to have time for me to do research, and this is why sometimes content takes time for me to get it out, and it may take a couple of days or a couple of weeks for me to research a subject to be able to break the subject down and make the video for you. And that's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteem, Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Get your copy of Esteem, Horror in the Hamptons in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.